It's going to be a rather short meeting. I'm Councilman Smith, Vice Chair of the Budget Committee. I'm joined by Councilman Koretz, the member of the Budget Committee. And Mr. Koretz is also carrying the role as a member of the Personnel Committee. It's a joint committee meeting, Personnel Committee, and the special joint meeting with the Budget and Finance Committee. We have 3 items for the joint committee meeting today and 1 item of the Personnel Committee. So any items discussed today will go forward with the recommendations of the Vice Chair of Budget and Finance and member of the Personnel Committee. With that, item number 1, please.
On item 1, the City Administrative Officer has submitted the latest report on the action taken by the Joint Labor Management Benefits Committee. This action was taken on January 13th, and there's outstanding reports that, if you choose, can be noted and filed from previous discussions.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is David Luther from the Personnel Department. With me is Alex Vasquez from the Personnel Department, our Benefits Chief, and Rita Aspen from the CIO's office. If you wouldn't mind, I'll give just a very brief history of how we got here to where we are today. This issue has been going on for several months at the Joint Labor Management Benefits Committee, the JLMBC, where we have proposed various changes to the city's civilian flex benefits plan. We could not get approval from the JLMBC to move forward on the changes that are attached in your packet. There's a letter dated October 15th, 2010, which outlined $13 million in savings that we had hoped to achieve. We submitted a letter on October 15th to the City Council to move forward and authorize those changes to the plan. We reported to a joint meeting of the Personnel and Budget Finance Committee on November 17th, and we were instructed by these 2 committees to try one more time to go back to JLMBC and continue negotiations and report back on January 10th to these 2 committees. We did have a special meeting of the JLMBC on December 21st. They formed a subcommittee of management and labor representatives. And I would say the spirit of cooperation was there. They did arrive at recommendations for the full JLMBC, which were adopted on January 13th. And those changes, we can run through those changes for you, but in summary, the changes amount to $14.26 million in savings to the city. If you exclude the proprietaries and the special funded portion of that, it would amount to about $6 million in general fund savings. Time is of the essence for us because we hope to have council authority to proceed with these changes. We would have to conduct an open enrollment for all civilian employees and implement these changes on July 1st, 2011. I would note that these changes do not apply at the moment to engineers and architects. They have a separate agreement, a labor agreement that would take precedence over the JLMBC actions, but there are efforts underway, discussions with them as well on implementing these changes. And without further ado, I just ask Alex to quickly run through what the changes are that we've arrived at.
You know, I've heard it a couple times already. I only had one question. I don't know if Koretz wants to hear it or has some specific questions. I just have one question for you that I didn't understand in looking at the analysis, and that was on the dental calculation. I don't understand how this works. It's 85% of the PPO, which is 100%. So obviously 85% is 85% of 100%. But
Sure.
What does that calculate out?
Well, basically, under the Flex program, employees are provided a subsidy if they're in the PPO plan that basically equates to the employee-only PPO coverage, which I believe is $43. And what this change does is basically the JLMBC has designated the city-sponsored plan to continue to be at that level, but it will be, they're proposing that we provide a subsidy at 85%. So basically what that means is that employees will have to contribute an additional $7 and I believe 40 cents a month towards the cost of the PPO plan if they choose to stay in that plan.
Okay. Mr. Koretz?
Just on the process, so once we approve it here and the council approves it, does this still have to go back to membership, or is this done by the committee and it's completed?
No, it's recommended by the JLMBC and authorized by council, and that's sufficient authority for us to conduct an open enrollment and implement the changes.
And it was done with full agreement of the JLMBC, right?
Labor.
Yes. No, it takes...
I know at one
for
point there was
JLMBC
talk
to
about
make
sort
that-
of
Yeah, no, there's
doing a meet and consult and
Yeah.
just telling them what we were going to do, and
No, there was an actual vote that took place, and there's a labor quorum and a management quorum. It takes a majority of those members from both labor and management to arrive at these recommendations.
and all those things that were done. That's,
Yes.
needless to say, a good thing. And what's the difference between this and EAA? Do they have a weaker or a stronger alteration to the previous arrangements? Do they give
I wouldn't
more or
say-
less?
I wouldn't say it's
basically?
weaker or stronger. It's different. One of the components that they had authorized in their MOU is a 5% contribution from each member to their healthcare costs, and that is not included in this package that was approved by the JLMBC. So that's why we're having discussions with them, because they do already have that component, and they've already approved several of these changes. So we're having ongoing discussions with them exactly how this is going to fit with their members.
Thank you.
Okay, so that being the case, then we would be approving the January 14th CAO Personnel Department recommendations and receive and file the October 15th, 2010 Personnel Report. Is that correct? Right. That'll be the order of the Chair of the Budget Committee and the member of the Personnel Committee. All right. Thank you very much. Item number 2.
Item 2 has been previously reviewed by the Public Works Committee, and what you have before you is a report relative to the special events one-stop shop, unfreeze of staffing, and other related actions. Public Works Committee has recommended that council approve the recommendations adopted by the board.
Good afternoon, council members. Andrea Alarcon, Commissioner and Vice President of the Los Angeles Board of Public Works. It's my pleasure to present to you the first annual special event permitting process report. As you're aware, in October of 2009, the city enacted a special events ordinance, and the primary intent of that ordinance was to recover all costs for city resources expended to support special events citywide. Over the course of this past year, we've permitted over 500 special events, generated over $2 million in revenue for the city, and so clearly that underlying intent was met. Having said that, this year has been a learning process, and so I think Councilmember Parks said it best. He said that the intent behind the ordinance was sound, but the mechanics need fixing. And so the mechanics, the intent of this report before you today is to fine-tune the special event permitting process. The report itself contains 14 recommendations to amend the ordinance as is. I am joined at this table and various members of the audience by representatives of all of the departments that are directly impacted by the special events ordinance. Over the course of this past year, in order to facilitate greater communication amongst all of the affected city departments, I created a special events team. It's a reoccurring monthly meeting of all of the internal departments, and so the representatives here before you can answer questions that are specific to their departments. So if you want, did you want me to walk, to your discretion, in essence of time, I can respond to your questions, or I can walk through each of the 14 recommendations?
Why don't you just highlight them real quick, the 14?
Sure. This is a joint committee meeting, so there is really only one item that pertains to, I think, the Personnel Committee, and that is recommendation number 1. Upon enactment of the ordinance in October of 2009, the council approved 5 position authorities. However, immediately upon enactment, all 5 of those positions were frozen. One of those in the 2010-11 budget process, one of those positions was eliminated, which left us with 4 positions. In June of 2010, we were able to fill 1 senior clerk typist position, and in October of 2010, we received approval from the CAO's Office in Managed Hiring to unfreeze a senior programmer analyst position. However, that still leaves 2 positions unfilled. So that is recommendation number 1, and I think that's really the only recommendation that pertains to the personnel.
Yeah. So, CAO, why, we pushed on them a lot more work, and then we pulled away the people to do it.
Well, good afternoon. My name is John Chavez, committee members with the CAO's office. Our position at this time, we respectfully disagree with Street Services' position to hire the 2 Street Services investigators. We believe that after getting the programmer analysts 3 on board, that particular process would be automated, probably be made a lot more efficient, and almost routine in nature. As such, we would consider only adding additional positions after that process has been automated. At that point, we'll have a better idea of the workload, how much, the proper classifications, because maybe Street Services investigators aren't the appropriate class for this particular position. So our office would like to hold off on adding any new positions until that process has been automated, and then we'll have a better sense as to the workload needed.
What's the time frame on the automation?
At this point, it is very speculative, but guessing probably another year, which leaves us permitting an entire citywide, facilitating an entire citywide permitting process with 1 senior clerk typist and 1 programmer analyst who will be entirely dedicated to creating a system, which then prohibits him from actually permitting special events.
Okay. CLA, excuse me. Paul Smith, CLA. Crucial to this is getting a system personnel on board quickly as possible at the skill set necessary to design and implement an automated system for this program. There's a lot of pieces to it. It's fairly complicated, but there are folks around town and around the city who can be an invaluable source of information. It's going to take time to move this forward in a developmental stage until implementation. There may be an opportunity to hire on a part-time basis an additional staff for the Bureau, because right now it's almost manual. Even though we have an online system, after that, inputting and everything else is a fairly time-consuming operation. I believe that the implementation of a better automated database and management reporting system would be invaluable to making this thing work better, faster, quicker, and more responsive to management inquiries. So you're caught between the fact that you're going to have a time lag between implementation of this system and what you have to do in the interim.
And that's the question.
Yeah, that's the question. So, council members, from our perspective, Bureau of Street Services concerned, we have investigators who are currently permitting special events who are supposed to be dedicated to other revenue-generating enforcement. And so they are now refocusing their attention on permitting of special events and managing paperwork when they're supposed to be out in the street enforcing illegal signposting, illegal vending, and so on. And so we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We need support. We're tasked with this is a monumental venture, and right now we have 1 senior clerk typist dedicated to this.
During the process of ERIP and last year with layoffs, it's the few that had, were there any people in those classes that could do that could be brought back on 90-day contracts?
I'm going to defer to Joe Cruz, who as of today was appointed acting assistant director of the Bureau of Street Services.
Congratulations, I think.
Thank you. Joe Cruz with the Bureau of Street Services. There were several classifications in the ERIP that could, in fact, be hired on a 90-day. We haven't pursued that option, given that this commitment will take much longer than 90 days. We're making do with the resources that we have at this particular point, but as Commissioner Alarcon pointed out, we certainly do need the help in terms of making the program work in the long term.
Yeah, and I understand your argument, and I don't disagree one bit. CEO is saying, let's wait to determine what we need until after the program's up and running to see what's really needed. And I would concur that we don't want to hire people we don't need a year from now. The question is, how do we get there how do we get to the finish line this year if we don't have anyone to do the work? Having a fancy computer system doesn't do any good if in the interim time the whole thing crashes and burns anyway. So, what is the solution?
Well, I
As
mean-
needed employees, what?
I think we could explore that with street services, see if the 90-day appointment might be a solution. We recognize that they are caught between a rock and a hard place, because the system in place right now is not efficient. I mean, it's semi-automated. It does require a lot of staffing. However, it's important to note that when these original positions were allocated to this particular service, there was really no analysis done on the workload, on the number of people needed. In fact, you know,
It
the
took
work...
6 years to come up with a plan, and then we didn't have figured out how to do it.
No, I think we could be faster than that. But I think we could work with street services on coming up with some middle ground. But, you know, we really think that once it's automated, we'll have a better sense. But of course, that takes time and
We don't disagree
No,
with
yeah,
that.
no one disagrees with that, right?
So what about a middle ground of, you asked for 2 people? Is there any chance that the needs would be less than 1 full-time person?
At this point, we will take anybody we can get.
What if we found that as a middle ground and hired 1 person in the unlikely event that that would be overstaffing? It doesn't sound like it.
Right.
Um,
In the interim, for this 1-year period, until the systems becomes live, we would be content with 1.
Chief?
That seems like a decent compromise.
Chief Bowman, Commander of Public Safety, oversee special events for the fire department, and I'd just like to remind us we're talking about millions of dollars of cost recovery coming into the city, and we're utilizing this system more and more, especially with the language change. And what I want to caution us is to have a choke point in our ability to track and do the collection process. So we really be cognizant of that, whether we have exempt positions at the beginning or whatever. All I know the need is here and now, and it's vital to the city and cost recovery.
I can give one example to underscore the chief's point. Per the ordinance, we are required to reconcile actual costs after the event takes place. Our goal internally has been to reconcile those costs within 90 days of the event. However, we are now backlogged to approximately 9 months to a year in terms of actual cost reconciliation. So now we are in the 2nd year of implementation of this permitting process, and we are issuing refunds for an event that happened last year simultaneously while we're issuing a permit for the same exact event the following year. It just doesn't make sense because we just don't have the capacity to meet our internal goals of the 90-day reconciliation. That's just one example.
Well, it seems to me the logical thing would be to let you hire 1, and if it turns out still to be dramatically short, then you could look at bringing back other folks on a 90-day basis. But I hate to hamstring you, because I think we're starting to do this in a number of places in City Hall where we're making cuts that wind up costing us money, and this sounds like one. So I would like to at least move and on the budget and finance side, and certainly on the personnel side, I get a unanimous vote.
Yeah.
That we supply you this 1 position and have you report back at an appropriate point as to whether you need additional resources.
We'd be very thankful if you did.
Okay. And I've read the rest of it. My staff likes the recommendations. I like them. Like you said, the mistakes were made, and we set this program. We didn't know the details of how it's going to work. Now we have a year experience. And the one thing I will say to the CEO, a lot of these recommendations are actually personnel intensive. That to make these recommendations work, to make the system work better, we need some people to do the auditing and do the bookkeeping, and the personnel aren't there. So I'll go along with Mr. Koretz's recommendation for the time being, and let's personnel. How long is there any list out there on this that we can pull from, or? Yeah. So there's no way you could hire for months and months and months, unless you bring back temporarily on 90 days. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Chair, would throw this out there, maybe a management analyst one or clerk of some classification. I mean, that,
You got a live list on MA1? Could we broaden it and say it could either be an MA classification or a inspector classification that could fill it on the 90-day type appointments? We, for the short term, until you can generate a list, which is going to take at least 6 months, right? 5 months. Do it by June 30th. That's the day I leave. I want to see it on my desk that day.
Council members, I think while we appreciate the flexibility being offered by the CAO, we'd like to stick as much as possible to the list of staffing identified for this particular program, and potentially to remove any ambiguity of the one position that's being offered at this point. We would prefer to have the senior investigator authorized at this particular
Just saying
time.
that's a very small opportunity as far as bringing back on 90 days. You're not going to get a list for 6 months. Oh, there are 40 incumbents in that? Okay.
Right.
What's the differential in pay? What's the difference in pay between a senior and
I would think that it's about 6,000 to 10,000
annual?
annually.
Not a big deal. Okay.
Now, I know we're looking at the possibility of more layoffs. Would the fact that there are people that we may be looking at laying off that could meet these classifications? Could that be
At this
relevant
point,
in any way?
Having had a few discussions about layoffs with the CAO, I don't think the Investigations and Enforcement Division is one of those divisions that would be targeted in the future. That particular division is down to the bone at this point.
it is, and yet it is primarily general funded. So it's a very important point to be made in this committee. In the future, $350 million deficit next year. So that's just one of the facts, is that they are a general funded operation.
Yeah. But we're also talking about collecting millions of dollars with that one person. So I think we can say it's easily going to say it's going to probably fund itself by just being more efficient this next year until we get this program really figured out.
Okay.
All right. So then the order will be to go with a senior inspector.
Councilmember, if I may clarify just or add one more comment, that would be our intention, is to hire a senior investigator, and as Bill has pointed out, that would probably come from within our current ranks on at least an emergency appointment basis.
Yeah.
What we would further like to request is, if that in fact does occur from within our ranks, that we be allowed to also backfill.
Fill to the lower rank.
Correct.
Okay. Which financially is in our best interest to do it that way, so, all right. So that would be then the recommendation of the personnel member and the vice chair and personnel, and member of the Budget and Finance Committee. And then we'll concur with the rest of the CAO and departmental recommendations encompassed in the CAO report.
Great.
All right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3.
The City Administrative Officer and the City Controller has submitted a joint report relative to a proposal to establish a personnel pool of 90-day hires to address a resource shortage of accounting and financial reporting personnel.
Good afternoon. Maria Gutierrez with the CAO's office, and with me from the Controller's office.
Matthias Barthen.
This report is being provided for informational purposes only. The council previously adopted the actual plan to address the accounting and financial personnel resource shortages throughout the city. The plan basically consists of hiring 90-day employees who have retired. As part of the action to appropriate $250,000 for this purpose, the council instructed our respective offices to report back on a couple of issues, and we have done so in this report. Those issues were regarding flexible hourly rates for 90-day hires, expanding the personnel pool to include employees who have been laid off, and reducing the need for the personnel pool through furlough exemptions. regarding the feasibility of paying more flexible hourly rates for 90-day hires. We're basically reporting that while we do have the flexibility to hire people anywhere between the first step and fifth step, ultimately the person needs to be paid at the class for the work that the person is being hired to do. However, for example, if we cannot bring someone to do an accountant work and then pay them at an accounting clerk level.
What happens if there's nobody willing to do that at that level, but there might be some people at a lower, there might be some people at a higher level willing to drop down, or people at a lower, obviously lower would be willing to accept the pay, but what if there's some people at a higher level when they left employment that would be, and the job is at a lower level? Could they choose to drop down to that level then?
Yes, they could. So long as they held that classification
Once in
as
their
part
career.
of their city employment, they could be
Okay.
hired under that
All right,
classification.
so you got some flexibility there. at
Yes.
least.
Right.
All right. Next one.
Yeah. And we just wanted to point out, too, that there have been some employees, surprisingly, who are willing to donate their time.
God bless them.
Surprisingly. The other issue that was raised was expanding the personnel pool to include city employees who have been laid off. The Personnel Department confirmed that displacements to date have not resulted in any accounting classification layoffs, which are the classes that we would be requiring for this resource pool.
Okay.
And lastly, the issue of reducing the need for the personnel pool by using employees who are furloughed. After further discussion with the Controller's Office, it was determined that this approach would likely be administratively burdensome, difficult to implement, and less cost-effective. A lot of the accounting classes, the accountant 1s and 2s, senior accountants and principal accountants, are members of the EAA unit, and they have already had their furloughs reduced from 26 days to 10 days. The Controller's Office would actually need staff for extended periods of time, and so it would be very difficult to implement hours at a time. There could also be potentially employee relations issues and legal issues involved with this approach.
I couldn't hear the last thing you said.
I said potentially there could be employee relations issues and legal issues involved with this approach. We'd have to
It comes down to date, all the furloughs exemption granted have been very structured, and they could be explained and justified. Either the positions are fully special funded or entire classes are being exempted, whereas this would result in a situation where you're kind of picking and choosing who gets exempted. So it may cause problems if the person next to you gets exempted and you're the same class and you don't get exempted because only a certain number of hours are required. It would just be very difficult to manage something like that. Again, and as Maria mentioned, as we have encountered problems, it has required like short-term fixes, a short-term need for the resource where a department may only need help for 2 weeks to get caught up on something, where it makes it very difficult to then exempt someone from a furlough because they couldn't dedicate 100% of their time on that one task that may be needed in another department that they're not currently employed in, because then that would now leave a hole in the department they're currently working in. So because it would just be very difficult to administer something like that.
So where we have holes in something and we could fill that by eliminating furloughs, we're not able to pick and choose and do that, even if we have needs that are unfulfilled.
Well, we can do, there's a difference that we can do it, but if we're challenged, then the whole rationale how we came about of who got exempted from the furlough, that would be something for employee relations to discuss. And I don't know if it would be better suited for a closed session, but from our standpoint, it may cause problems as far as we'd have to document what the rationale was for who got exempted from the furlough at the end of the day.
Okay. Since this is a note and file, we will note and file that, and they were good questions. I'm glad we asked them, but the answers obviously weren't exactly what we wanted, so. We will note and file that, and just for the record, Mr. Zine was going to be here today. There was a officer-involved shooting of a school police officer shot in his district today. Thank God the guy's going to be okay, but there are 9 schools locked down in CD3, so he couldn't be here. So that's why we have a very short committee today. That concludes the joint meeting, and the next portion is yours. See you later.
Hey, have a good one. And if we could just briefly have someone walk us through item number 4.
On item 4, the city administrative officer has submitted a report. This has to do with an amendment to the 207, 2014 Management Employees Union Memorandum of Understanding number 36, and this is amendment number 4.
And just briefly, why was this done, and what does it cover?
The controller requested and the EERC approved a change to the ability to administer a certain bonus that they have. Currently, they can bonus one position within their organization to 4 premium levels, and they wanted the ability to administer that same up to 4-level premium bonus among 3 positions as opposed to 1. And so we negotiated that, and the union agreed, and it's ready to be approved.
So essentially just to provide greater flexibility.
I would assume so.
Okay, well, there's no other questions, since there's no other members.
Great.
I'm fine with it, so it'll be unanimous, 1 person, 1 vote.
Super, in my day.
And
There are no public comment.
so we'll approve the CAO's recommendations. Is there a comment?
No.
No comments? So we are adjourned.